Hi, I'm Len Epp from LeanPub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Dmitry Vostokov. Based in Dublin, Dmitry is a speaker and writer and founder of the Software Diagnostics Institute. He has written over 50 books on a variety of subjects, including memory dump analysis, software and memory forensics, malware analysis, and more. You can follow him on Twitter at dumpanalysis and check out his website at dumpanalysis.org. Dmitry is the author of a number of books that have been published on LeanPub, including Encyclopedia of Crash Dump Analysis Patterns, Detecting Abnormal Software Structure and Behavior in Computer Memory, the third edition. In this interview, we're going to talk about Dmitry's background and career, professional interests, his books, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience writing and publishing. So thank you very much, Dmitry, for being on the LeanPub Front Matter podcast.
Thank you, Len. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for what I call their origin story. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you got interested initially in computers and technology.
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, I grew up in Soviet Union. Went to school just before, I would say, the so-called perestroika, if everyone knows about that. And I got interested in many subjects. I was interested in history first. And but then around, I would say, when I was maybe 12-year old or something like that, I got interested in chemistry. So I started participating in Olympic Games that were very popular in Soviet Union at that time. So was a winner a couple of times at different levels, but didn't make it to international level. But, as a result, I actually entered Moscow State University. But due to some small, I would say, fortunate probably, because fortunate accident, I was enrolled into special computer group. So it was chemistry with some computational chemistry. And and before that, actually, before I was 18, I never had any experience with computers. Maybe it's calculators. We had computer languages at school. It was called Russian computer language or Russian algorithmic language. It was all on paper. So I was doing some algorithms, but that was all on paper. So and I immediately started working with computers, started learning Fortran, assembly language. It was computers I worked on, they were clones of PDP-11. And when I say I used to work with PDP-11, people think I'm very old, but it is not, because our clones were kind of much younger than original PDP-11 computers. So yeah, it was also assembly language, and I got really interested in programming. And one of my first achievements was as a compiler, I translated by hand 800 lines of Fortran program into 2000 lines of assembly language and got 25% increase in speed. But that was not that much. But the program was actually calculating fuel for Russian space agency. For at that time, if you remember, there was Buran.
Yeah.
The first shuttle in 80s, and the program calculated for weeks some properties of rocket fuel. So 25% increase was very great. So yeah, so I got started with chemistry, but my heart was in computers. So I started learning C, started doing a lot of programming in our chemical department. So a lot of experience, but then by accident again, actually, there was breakdown of Soviet Union. Life was not very good for being a student. It was the beginning of 90s, and by stroke of accident or luck or whatever, I joined a company from United States that was doing speech recognition. It was called Covox. The guys were from Covox, roughly. It was one of pioneers in computer recognition. And they were competitors of Sound Blaster, if you remember this company. So yeah, and there I spent like 7 years doing some stuff. And after that, I joined another company, also working from Moscow. It was related to image processing, AccuSoft, very famous in state. And also, but it was all work I would say, from home or from some remote office. And just before coming to Ireland in 2001, in January, I worked for a couple of years for a very big system integrator in Russia, where I also learned kind of modern software engineering practices. And 20 years ago, in January 2001, I arrived to Ireland, started working for Ericsson and some other companies, spent 14 years in Citrix, so I really liked. And actually, regarding my career, I actually gave a big kind of thought about it before our interview. And I found out that I probably have 3 distinct careers going in parallel. So one career is software engineering that started, I would say, in 1993, probably, or even early if you count me programming in chemistry department, right? The second career is software technical support. It started when I joined Citrix in 2003. It was actually going in parallel with software engineering, but 14 years in technical support is a very good experience because most of software engineers, they don't have experience with software technical support, working with customers and understanding their mentality. So this kind of sales, all this. And third, of course, I would say career is in publishing, in writing and publishing.
Thanks very much for that summary. I'm sure it was hard to keep it so compact, but I really like that you have the sort of three phases in the end. That's really great. But there's a lot to talk about there. One thing, so you mentioned perestroika. I think that actually probably about half of our audience doesn't know what that is. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what life was like for you, sort of in your early days as a student, and what perestroika was.
Okay, so perestroika, it was complete breakdown of the Soviet, I would say, late socialism style in Soviet Union. It was kind of changed. So it was glasnost also. Glasnost means you could talk about different topics freely. So I would say life in that time gradually become so I would say free speech was everywhere, like probably in end of 80s. Beginning of 90s. I would say in some sense, the free speech was even more free than in other democratic countries of the world at that time. So even in Russia. So there was Yeltsin, one of the first Russian presidents. So life was very good initially, during initial stages of perestroika. So it was very good. But then, you know, this kind of breakdown was associated with changing from socialism to capitalism. So it was in some sense abrupt coming of a wild capitalism to Russia. So the life for students was not very good if they were not backed up by employment. So I remember one day, like the prices were like 5 times more expensive. You know, imagine for students it would be very hard. But yeah, I did some rough times for a year or something like that. But then I say I was very lucky because I joined working for American company. And imagine my first salary was just $50 and it was enough to survive. I mean, like, life was very luxurious. You know,
yeah, no, that's very fascinating. Since
then it was growing. Yeah, my salary was growing.
Was perestroika? Did that mean the opening up? Is that what it kind?
Yes, opening up also to the whole world, but it's also opening up internally.
Yeah,
you could speak a lot of things. You could read a lot of books, and it was a very great experience. And also, computers were coming to Russia and Soviet Union. So it's like. End of 80s, beginning of 90s, there were personal computers coming to Russia. So it's a very, very interesting, I would say, period.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, I've spoken to people, you know, on this podcast from all around the world about their first experience with technology and things like that. But your experience of being sort of in this very serious, I mean, multiple phases of transitions.
Serious computers.
Yeah. And you know, when you mentioned the sort of the Olympics and stuff like that, you know, for chemistry and things like that, I think one thing that it sort of might be difficult to communicate to people who aren't aware of the history is that this was a very important thing for the Soviet Union to compete globally on numerous things, right? And the idea that you would be, recruiting students to participate in this was there was a self-aware idea that we're sort of building the reputation and trying to send the message that this is a good way to live in our country.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it's like actually perestroika comes along and it's like, no, that's not the right way to live. And just a very, it must have been a very
complete breakdown of mentality, of many people. People.
And so you started working for this American company in the early 90s, if I get the timeline correctly. And you said you were working from home. So how did that work?
Oh, I would say, companies, okay, the opening of society also resulted. There were a lot of entrepreneurs coming to Russia, to Moscow, St. Petersburg, or St. Petersburg, or whatever other cities at that time, actually to buy resources, like people resources. So there were a lot of scientists working also in Russia, like, for example, speech recognition or speech synthesis, everything kind of related.
Or rocket fuel.
I wasn't a scientist in speech recognition, but I was very good in system programming. And also Windows at that time started to develop, Windows 3.1 and all this. So it was great time, so Microsoft.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So were you working online? Like, had the internet and the World Wide Web, was that a sort of popularly?
Initially we used internet. I remember was coming something about 1996 to Moscow, around that, if I remember correctly. But before we used BBS, bulletin board systems, email, all this kind of thing. Email, not that probably like internet type, but something different, like, and people will come in also, people will come in just to Moscow to visit, like once in a month or 2 months, and we either worked from home. I worked even in my laboratory, also in Moscow State University, and from home as well, and later we had an office, so it was quite interesting.
That's just so fascinating. So I'm sure you've got a wealth of stories to tell, but I wanted to go into a little bit of detail about that specific example you gave when you were in school, I believe, of translating code by hand from one language to another. That's just so interesting. And I'm just very curious about the process. So you were given something probably on paper and told to translate it, and you would have had paper books on Fortran or whatever it was, and then you would have had to submit your result. And did someone else then enter that code into a machine and then run it?
I was actually, the code was already there in Fortran, and I was actually writing it. I think I was writing it also in some editor.
Okay.
But, at that time, editors were very, I would say, simple. They're not that powerful like now. I was just translating line by line. And assembly language was not very, I would say, complex for PDP-11, but mostly it was, of course, floating point style. And was kind of line by line translating, even translating print statements as well in Fortran, and then running that to see if we get the same kind of output.
That's really fascinating. And you mentioned, I guess you've had a couple of phases of your career and a couple of phases of your life where you were living as well. And you moved to Ireland in 2001, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, in January 2001, yeah.
And I'm just curious, I myself have, moved from one country to another to live and work and things like that. And so have many other guests on the podcast. And I'm curious about that. Was it easy for you to move to, in a kind of legal and citizenship sense, was it easy for you to move to Ireland from Russia?
Oh, yes, I can talk about this freely. It's a wonderful experience. First of all, you can't believe I was actually living and working in Moscow, but I was recruited in Ukraine. Because Moscow, the life in Moscow was good, and not many people will go into, I would say, willing to go to Ireland at that time.
Okay.
So, but from Ukraine, a lot. So the recruitment was in Ukraine. So I flew from Moscow to Kiev, had some interviews there, was hired, flew back to Moscow. Then I applied for my working visa. And actually, just shortly before that, Ireland introduced the so-called working visas. So you could freely come to Ireland work up for 2 years, then renew your visa, working visa, but you were not dependent on your employer. If something was coming like a layoff or you wanted to change employment, then you could freely change your employment, like go to another employer. So it's different in other countries. So you lose your employment, you have to come back. So that was one major, I would say, good point for me to come to Ireland, actually. And I came to Ireland actually to learn English. I may not be very well in speaking, but in writing or reading, I'm very good. So I mostly concentrated on reading and writing, So you have to put something aside, you can't learn all these things.
No, I think you're speaking very well, and of course your writing is very good as well. But yeah, that's interesting. I imagine that was probably around the time when Ireland was sort of becoming what they called the Celtic Tiger at the time, or something like that.
Yes.
And so they were competing very aggressively to become a place where people, particularly I imagine in technology and finance and things like that, would work. And I didn't know that detail, though. That's very interesting that they were being open about sort of immigration and work status to kind of encourage people to come and stay and not be afraid of losing their job, but actually be able to sort of, find better ones. And then you've got this pool of local people who are already there that the companies that are growing can draw upon without having to worry so much about the sort of minutiae of, exactly transitioning from one job to another and things like that. That's a really fascinating detail. And I'm just kind of curious, how did you like it and I imagine you've probably been living in Dublin the whole time, but was it a big shock?
Yes, it was very big shock. Actually, I arrived to a small town in the middle, just the heart of Ireland, called Athlone, not to confuse with CPUs that were popular at that time. Intel or AMD, I don't remember. So it was a long time ago, but it was a popular joke, about. So Athlone was a great small town, but imagine you live in a very big city with millions of people, and then you arrive in a small town and you walk faster than twice as fast as other people, initially. So yeah, but I liked it. And after some time, I found a new company. Actually was persuaded by a recruiter. So life in Dublin is better. I mean, in sense, you could see more, like in big cities. So, and then I moved shortly, kind of in less than a year, I moved to Dublin. And since then, of course, I live in Dublin and really like it.
I imagine people must have been very interested in you in that small town as well. All of a sudden, here's this Moscovite amongst us.
Yes. People actually, Irish people are very friendly. I really, it's great experience.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And so professionally, then you ended up at working for Citrix, I believe. That was that while you were in Ireland that you started working for them?
No. Initially, I started working for Ericsson.
Oh, for Ericsson, sorry. Okay.
Company. Yes, in Athlone, very nice, and still have very nice office. And then I actually moved to another company called Program Research. That was compiler front ends for C and C++. So very good experience learning how actually learning about semantics of programming languages, C++. Actually, there I finally learned C++ well, and but then after I was in 1 year and a half, probably. Yeah, I moved to another company. I was consultant, my first security company. And then after doing some consulting work there, contracting, I finally settled in Citrix. And Citrix was a really great experience for me. I would say, like at that time, my career forked into software engineering and software technical support. And I also started visiting the United States for work purposes. So it was also a great experience. I was in Florida, was in Seattle. So I really liked that, the whole 14-year experience, really good for me.
And you mentioned, the sort of shift to working with customers. And so was this like big corporate customers that you were working with when you were doing support?
Oh yeah, Citrix is a very well-known kind of company providing remote desktop services, terminal services, Windows, also acceleration of internet traffic. So very well-known company, and they have now kind of cloud services now. So yeah, customers were mostly EMEA from Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Yes.
And UK. So it was all customers, I would say, most of Fortune companies, small companies, but mostly my work was about internal customers.
Like, I see.
But from time to time, I was also engaging with kind of outside customers, and this was a really good experience to see everything like that. So,
and I'm just looking at your profile on LinkedIn here, and this will come up when we start talking about your books and things like that. But you worked on you performed diagnostics and you did anomaly detection and things like that. And I was just particularly you say here, it says on your bio, analysis of software execution artifacts such as memory dumps, traces, and logs. And I just wanted to take the opportunity here to link what we're going to be talking about with your books to your career. So for anyone listening who might not know anything, let's say they don't know anything about this kind of stuff, what are memory dumps?
Okay, it's basically, I had one management training at some point when I was a manager, and the guy also asked me this question, and I answered, and then he replied, "Oh, I understand, that's computer psychology, like psychoanalysis or whatever of computers." But of course, I won't provide this answer. So basically, you have memory in your computer, and if something happens, some wrong behavior, like for example, computer stops working or hangs or frozen, you just take the contents of that memory from your computer, put it into some file, and then you send it to some analyst to look at it. And then you look at this memory and try to find who was responsible. Maybe this is operating system vendor, or maybe that is some other company, several companies, because sometimes there are conflicts. So then you kind of analyze and you work in such sense like you are a general practitioner or GP, like in medicine. So in providing diagnostics. And then, if you have enough knowledge, you may even fix it. But most of the time, you won't be able to fix it because, say, the problem lies in operating system vendor, and then you advise, so go to that specialist. So it may be Citrix, or that may be Microsoft, or that may be Linux, so or kind of thing, So that's what I say, diagnostics. So initially I was calling on that memory dump analysis, but then gradually I realized that it's actually software diagnostics that I was doing. And you also have software logs. This is similar to narrative in medicine. So you provide stories. So programs run, they execute, they do something, and then they write their own stories. So they write their own stories in a log. So I actually founded the so-called software narratology because I was actually thinking how to analyze all these logs. And then I found out that narratology, what kind of stories, is actually close approximation that computers were doing. So
yeah, I'd definitely like to talk about that. This is so fascinating. So just to sort of start at the sort of very detailed level, because this connection between sort of psychology or psychoanalysis, the stories that we tell, and then what computers do and what we do with them and how we try and understand what they've done. To get to talk about that, we sort of need to understand a little bit, just at a very basic non-technical level, about how a computer works. And I just remember a friend of mine who I've never studied computer science. I'm sort of LeanPub's resident non-technical person, although I'm pretty technical in a lot of ways. But the way someone once described it to me was like, okay, a computer is like a list of tasks. Imagine it like a big stack of paper, and the topmost task is the first one that you do, and then you take that one off, and then you do the next task and the next task, and it's just that it does it incredibly fast, and that there's this stack of tasks and they go in order. But then what you're saying here is that the computer will have a kind of memory of what it did.
Yeah.
Exactly, and much better than our own memories in a way.
Yeah, and they talk very fast. They talk really fast. So they talk so fast that their narrative may be like gigabytes or terabytes of information. And then you have to look at that narrative and try to find out what actually computer was saying.
It's so fascinating. Yeah, no, to
Or
talk about what the computer was saying and to think about it in those terms, right? Because I think for a lot of us, as ordinary, computer users, if something breaks, we sort of do the equivalent, sometimes literally and sometimes figuratively, of just unplugging it and plugging it back in. And if it works again, we're fine. We just carry on. But if it's someone like you, or like something very serious is happening, and then you actually need to look into it and figure out, maybe we got it working again by banging the machine or something like that, but
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
but you have to understand what actually went wrong. And I think that if you're not familiar with how this kind of technology works, you might think, oh, you'll just go in the memory of task by task, and then you'll find the one that failed and that'll explain it. But obviously it's
Exactly.
far more complex than that, and you're not always going to find the answer. But what you particularly, I think, we're interested in and are interested in these patterns, right? And this is, so you've got this encyclopedia of over 300 patterns that you've identified over the years. And yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that connection to narratology, right? Because the computer's telling you a story, the memory is telling you a story, but then you've got to look for that story, and you've got to find what those patterns are, and then you've got to communicate them to someone to fix the problem or explain what it is. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about narratology and how this all fits in. Maybe even if you can think of a specific example where you were working on a particular project and you were given this challenge to figure something out, and how you would use this in sort of your professional life to deal with what you've got to deal with.
Okay, so okay, that's a great question, and about patterns. And the patterns were very popular before I actually started working in technical support, but they were mostly used in designing and implementing or architecting
Okay.
software. That was this phase I usually call like construction phase. But apart from construction, once software is constructed, you actually ship it to customers, and it could be running in a big data center, spanning 10,000 computers. So the company may have 10,000 desktops, right? And then something may happen, and you have to analyze what's the problem, or find a root cause, or do some diagnostics. And this phase I usually call post-construction. And here we also need to have patterns. So we have problem. So we need to use, we need to have some vocabulary or language actually to describe these problems and solutions to them. So basically what I came upon was the idea of analysis patterns for post-construction. So you have problem, you have to analyze it. And then you have common ways, common techniques to do that analysis and find something. So this kind of analysis patterns, of course, they are completely independent from just patterns. So what is just pattern could be your computer crashed in particular module. Or a simple example is, now we have printer problems came to spotlight, security, right? So, but in the past, printer problems were abundant because printer drivers were designed for home use. They were not designed to use in corporate environments where you had, like say, 100 users suddenly starting to print. So, and then printer driver would misbehave and crash the print spooler, the printer kind of print manager, right? And then the print manager would actually dump itself, or operating system would dump it into a memory dump. So that memory dump would end up, like say, would be sent to me. So I would look at it and find out, okay, this particular print driver vendor is at fault. So, but this is kind of a pattern, so, right? But how I would find out that this particular driver was at fault, this is analysis pattern. So basically that encyclopedia, this encyclopedia talks about analysis patterns. There could be some patterns there as well, but mostly it is analysis patterns, because otherwise, there could be millions of patterns.
Yeah, no,
right?
it's really fascinating, and I think that I mean, it's even stronger than a kind of analogy with what happens in psychiatry, for example, right? So, what's the big manual called, the DSM or something like that?
Yes, exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
And this is I'm not going to try and derail this too much, but that's actually a real sort of interest of mine, is that one of the things that people misunderstand a lot of what happens in psychiatry, because psychiatry made the terrible unscientific mistake of using ordinary English language words to name the patterns that and there's always this little bit of a dialectic, right? Are you identifying the pattern or are you creating the pattern? And it's kind of both at the same time. And people would understand what psychiatry and sort of what psychologists or therapists are up to much better if instead of using words like depression, they named it like pattern X1592. And then you could just, it's pattern X1592. You go look that up and you see there's some paper where someone defined pattern X1592. And it's, under certain conditions, we can observe behavior XYZ in response to stimuli 1, 2, 3. And then you'd be, okay, but what I'm talking about when I'm talking about quote unquote sort of depression is actually an identified pattern, and a pattern that can be identified according to various acceptable methods. And what you're talking about is the understanding the behavior, and in particular, the interesting thing we particularly often get interested when things go wrong, and so we want to be able to. I mean, now when you start talking about fixing, it gets more problematic when you're talking about people's minds rather than computers. But still, the sort of the ideas is very similar to what's going on. And then, when you talk about having a shared language, well, why do we give names to these patterns and then have manuals or encyclopedias? It's so that we can talk about them.
Yes.
Once we can talk about them, then we can resolve or address the situations. But what's happening in sort of psychiatry and what's happening in what you're talking about are sort of not just analogously similar, but are actually kind of substantively similar.
Yes, and I would say psychopathology is also one of my favorite. I have a few books on that. I'm not that deep into it, but I'm trying actually to learn from various disciplines.
Yeah, you talk about software pathology, right?
Yes. Something. No, this is software pathology is I would say more related, to defects and like similar to pathology, because pathology is now used everywhere. Like, for example, people in data science talk about data pathology, right? And so why not to talk about software pathology as well? Especially is pathology has a log suffix that actually, as a joke, may be related to logs, but it's not. So but starting talking about patterns, analysis patterns, I also kind of applied the same approach to analyzing logs and traces. So something how you would analyze a trace or a log, not just finding particular that web server crashed at particular point of time, that would be concrete pattern, or general pattern like web server crashes, right? In particular module, but way how to analyze them.
What are traces?
Okay, what are traces? Traces, there are different, I would say, definitions of that. I usually use traces and logs interchangeably. So for me, it is the same thing. But nowadays, people talk about tracing in context of distributed tracing. But I was lucky enough, actually, because all my trace analysis experience was distributed. And I didn't know it was only recently called distributed tracing. So, and just simple, when program outputs some statements on the screen, this is usually nowadays called logs. But I use them kind of in the same way for me. It's just, I would say, marketing description. So some people, if I say trace analysis patterns, people would say, okay, is it related to distributed tracing? But if I say log analysis patterns, people would think, okay, it's about logs, but not trace. So I made up this trace and log analysis patterns recently.
And is tracing, for example, I mean, what is a trace in sort of in the context, say, of cloud computing or something like that?
Okay, so in cloud computing, you have a lot of services, native applications. You have operating system calls. So everything is interconnected. You have containers, you have container management components, everything. And then they all talk. They all output their logs. So, and then you want actually, to correlate them. So your small service, I would say, crashes, but you want to see what happened at that time, in particular, I would say, broker or operating system, what's going on there, right? So you want to combine as much as possible in some intelligent way. Of course, you can't combine everything. It's too much. So this is kind of an idea behind distributed tracing. So yeah, to combine individual small logs, so you could do some correlation similar to data science, data analysis.
Okay. So it's across. I mean, I had a sort of crude idea of tracing being across different specific machines, but you're saying it's the different programs that are talking to each other as well, and they'll each have their own log, and then
it's not even talking to each other. It could be also the program. Like I would say you have a debate in Congress or in Parliament, right? You have 20 people talking at the same time, and you actually someone they may be talking to each other, and then someone starts shouting, and then right, and you have transcription of everything, right? And you want to correlate. Okay, that guy said something about taxes here, right? And then another one at the same time was silencing himself, right? Herself.
Oh, that's
so
just super.
Okay, that silence may be a sign actually why that deputy was actually not speaking for this particular topic. So all this kind of actually the silence itself would be also some sign. You have to so you do correlation between all different, I would say, narratives, software narratives.
That's incredibly fascinating to me. I mean, particularly the idea of doing a kind of analysis of simultaneous speakers and what they're saying. Because I mean, my academic background is in English literature and in philosophy,
right. Oh.
and of course the model that we have in typically sort of in philosophy for analyzing a debate is one speaker speaks and then another speaker speaks and then another speaker speaks and then another speaker speaks, or even when we're analyzing different works of literature in relationship to each other, it's always there's the whole coherent thing and then there's the next whole coherent thing. But the idea of doing some analysis of multiple speakers at the same time and then sort of understanding the meaning and the interplay of those as interacting forces and what the outcome is, for example, is just really interesting. I'll have to go away and think about that. But on that note,
sorry, interrupting you. Actually, you mentioned English literature studies, and I was particularly interested in narratology and critical theory as well. So I read a couple of books. So even some tracing log analysis pattern names were influenced by critical theory and narratology. So I understand. Yeah. And so.
Can you think of a couple off the top of your head? That's really fascinating.
For example, defamiliarizing effect, something that you read. For example, in particular, I would say book, and then something that triggers you, something you see something completely unfamiliar, right? So this also happens in tracing log analysis as well. And there are a couple of others, I would say. So I published a book called Tracing Log Analysis, and it's now, I think, in the 4th edition, but I changed title. So the latest title is called Trace Log Text Narrative, because I finally realized that the same ideas could be applied also to text, because you can actually break text into similar, like we have traces and logs, and apply the whole kind of apparatus of tracing log analysis. There are more than 200 patterns there.
That's really fascinating. Particularly the concept of defamiliarization, for example, for those who might not know, I'll try. I mean, I haven't talked about this in years, but to try and explain it to people a little bit, it would be like, imagine something that you take for granted suddenly becomes very present to you. So, for an example that might be the sudden presence in your environment of someone wearing industrial level hearing protection and operating a leaf blower. If to a lot of people, they just don't. That's just a part of the landscape. Every once in a while. But if you sometimes you can have this moment where you kind of blink and go, "What on earth is someone doing on a street where people live, operating industrial machinery that's so loud it damages hearing?" And when you start thinking about things ordinarily, you just think, "Oh, there's someone doing yard work." But when you start bringing these other categories of explanation to it, then it can become very strange to you all of a sudden, something that was so familiar you didn't even notice it. When you come at it from another direction, you suddenly kind of see it in a new light. And so the term defamiliarization is partly about that kind of thing, and that can actually be part of like that's when things start getting very political as well, right? Because that's where it would be, in Marxist theory, it would be, trying to make the sort of structures of capitalism defamiliarized, right? So it's like, why is it that behind that window is a loaf of bread, and I'm hungry, but I can't have it unless I've got some specific bills in my pocket that I can give the person on the other side who's protecting that loaf of bread. Things like that. That's so interesting. And so actually, just on that note, I mean, and this might be a good opportunity to segue to, you said there was this third part of your career where you got into publishing and writing, and you founded something. I'm just looking up the name of it here. I had it here. Open Task Publishing, which I believe you founded in 2008. And I'm hoping that was a good opportunity for you to talk about that shift in your career.
Yes.
And so how did that come about?
Okay, yeah, it's interesting story actually. I was avid reader of many books in software engineering, so I always wanted to write my own book. But it's one thing, many people want to write books, and many people don't start actually, or start and then don't finish, right? So, and I wanted to write a book about, as you guess, speech sound recognition, because that was of my kind of first interesting projects. But what happened actually, due to some luck, I started blogging. I think in 2006, I started blogging, and immediately I got that idea as a software engineer working in technical support. I got that idea of patterns, analysis patterns, started writing about crash dump analysis patterns. And because this new field was completely unexplored before, so there were actually a lot of things to write. So many people start blogging, but they don't have much to say. Not because they kind of don't have abilities, but because field is already taken. You can't just say original things all the time, or don't have ideas. But here I had plenty of ideas. So software was crashing every day, so like lots of things, and with the help of debuggers, I could also write additional text, because you could include snippets of debuggers, debugging output, and then gives you
right, specific examples, text.
Yeah, specific examples. So, and then roughly in 2007, I believe there was one book published called The Old New Theme, or The New Old Theme about Windows API. It was actually a collection of blog entries. It was published by a big publisher. And I thought, okay, so maybe I should actually publish my own blog as a book. And I was thinking about these lines. And at the same time, also at this time, there were some sites like Lulu, for example, Press. So you could actually upload your PDF file. And immediately after a couple of days, you could get your book printed. So I started with printing out a debugger output. So I got like pretty heavy books called reference tech traces. So it's a very good experience. I would say exciting experience to upload your PDF file and then suddenly have your book kind of, it's similar like to DIY projects with electronics, or something you can hold in your hands. So yeah, and then after that, I decided let's try with with this blog. Some people actually approached me when I announced that I would be publishing. So what publisher would be publishing? They were asking me. All names were mentioned, like big publishers, but I said no, nobody contacted me from big publishers. So I decided to publish myself. So I had to learn. It was very steep learning curve. So initially I published on Lulu as in hardback and paperback. But then I decided, so I actually wanted to have all this on Amazon. So I started buying and reading books on how to do publishing for Amazon, and there was no Kindle at that time or Creative Space or whatever. So, and the only thing was to do publishing for Amazon was to join Lightning Source. That was print on demand. That's now part of Ingram. So I got this account and learned how to provide pre-media, create all these covers for books. I had to buy software like Adobe Acrobat to do all this, I would say, SMIC conversions and all kind of what real publishers do. And then I started kind of publishing, and my books started appearing on Amazon, and that was great success, especially for the first volume of Memory Dump Analysis Anthology. This is now in 16 books or 14 volumes. And then I started adding more books and more books in color, in paperback, in hardcover. And lately, I also started selling in PDF, in EPUBs. And I think in 2008 or 10, O'Reilly, Sapphire Books Online, approached me. And I signed a contract, 10-year contract with them. So I also, for 10 years, I had a kind of very good channel for content publishing, and also books 24/7. Also as well published my, I would say, first editions. Yeah, so it's great experience.
Yeah,
and, but a good story always comes to end. You know, Sapphire Books Online decided to stop cooperating with small publishers. So as soon my 10-year-old contract finished, so they actually said, okay, we are now concentrating on our own stuff, learning. So, and then I was looking for another channel. And then I recalled that a year or so ago, I learned about LeanPub. And then I started putting all my PDF books on EPUB variants where I had them on LeanPub. And initially it was very slow, but actually it's great success because some books I actually only published initially on LeanPub. That was visual category theory. Kind of.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that. Yeah, I know. I'd like to talk about that in a bit too. That's a really great series there. But yeah, thank you very much for sharing that story. It's interesting. Your trajectory with publishing is kind of similar to LeanPub's in a way, and it's the same timeline. Almost. LeanPub started out as a blog to book platform, and
maybe I heard about it. Blog to book.
Yeah, and actually, my co-founder Peter's first self-published book was on Lulu. And if you want to read about that story, you can go to LeanPub/Lean and read all about it. But yeah, his experience there, I won't go into it in detail, but was, of course, it's so wonderful to have, an actual physical copy of your book. But along the way, he was publishing it as a digital book and in progress. And he would, give people a code when they bought the book on Lulu to go to basically a website where they could comment and stuff like that and give feedback. And so the book that he ended up publishing in print on Lulu when it was done had been built along the way. And that was kind of how the idea for lean publishing came along. But as you're talking about, like back in the day, getting a print book was like really complicated. Everybody felt like they were reinventing the wheel every time they did it. And there is still, to some extent, an element of that. But it wouldn't have been without banging our heads against the same wall stubbornly over time.
I say that. I say that I have this kind of publishing career, separate career, because I had to learn so many things. I was even thinking, let's write a publishing CV, just where I only put things related to publishing, and completely omit computers. So like all different things. So I may at one point produce publishing CV.
I think that would be a really interesting. That would be a really interesting story to tell, because I think there'd be a lot of other people who'd be fascinating. I mean, to hear about someone there are a lot of other people who've gone on the same path, and I think a lot of people feel very kind of alone in that. But actually, there's many authors all around the world who've struggled against the same things and sort of succeeded and failed in the same ways and things like that. And it's a really fascinating story. And so, actually, this gives us the opportunity. Towards the end of the interview, we get very much into the weeds of writing and self-publishing and things like that. And I wanted to ask you, how are you how do you write your books today, and how do you produce them? What apps do you use or anything like that?
I am pretty much a Windows user, so because most of my life experience was with Windows, not counting MS-DOS, but I would say, yes, I use Microsoft Word,
Okay.
stream to PDF later on, and then use Adobe Acrobat to do all kind of finishing, and use Adobe, or I use Adobe Photoshop for, I would say, image conversion, because sometimes you need specific images, not in a color space, but also with some amount of grayscale, otherwise, you won't be accepted by a real kind of production environment.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So you write in Word, and then you'll produce a PDF, and then you'll add the images in Adobe Acrobat. Is that how it would work, or would you put the images in Word?
Basically, it forks into online. Now, actually, my pipeline is now kind of very organized now. So when
Okay.
I do everything in Microsoft Word, but then I fork into print,
Oh, I
into
see.
online.
Okay.
Online have all the images added, a kind of PNG or JPEG, or all kind of fine. But for print, especially now, I do color books mostly. So I need to add the same pictures, but in a different color space,
I
and
see.
probably
Okay.
a different property, like for example, less black grain. So all these adjustments I need to do in some software, but at some point of time, long time ago, I bought Adobe Acrobat. So because I tried with open source and I couldn't do quite the same thing that was commercial Adobe Acrobat was doing. So I had to buy Adobe Acrobat. Expensive, but actually it was worth it. For 10 years, I'm using the
Sure.
same Acrobat. So, and then I put some file for publishing, and online I distribute on LeanPub or sell separately, or but if I want to do EPUB, I usually use iAuthor on
iAuthor.
Mac,
Okay.
on Mac Pro, or some kind of computer. That's excellent tool to produce EPUB. You just load Microsoft Word file, and then you do some corrections, and then
Okay.
that's it.
Okay.
It's very straightforward now.
Okay. Okay.
iBook author or something. I don't remember correctly how it is called. I
Yeah,
think
that's really great to hear those details, and especially the forking from ebook to print, and sort of dealing with images and things like that is something that can be really difficult. But once you've, as you say, once you've got your pipeline organized, and that can take a long time, it can be a really streamlined process. And just for anyone, a very particular point to make it for anyone listening. LeanPub has a bring your own book writing mode, which is what Dmitry uses.
yes,
So
yes.
so you can use all of our awesome. I mean, well, I'm speaking proudly of our own product, but you can use all of our awesome features for in progress publishing and all that kind of stuff without having to use one of LeanPub's write in a LeanPub writing mode process. So you can actually have your own totally independent process for producing PDF, EPUB, and Mobi, and you can still publish your book on LeanPub, and that's what Dmitry does.
Yes, that's great. That's great. And one feature I like on LeanPub as well is, sometimes people return books for different reasons, right? And I like actually that they're able to write some comments while they actually return it. And it actually, sometimes it triggered me writing 3 books. Like, for example, one user of visual category theory complained that he has difficulty understanding mathematical language used, right? And then I immediately produced another part 0, free one, also published on LeanPub. It's free. It actually explains this language in some detail. So for me, it was kind of, and one story was I made a mistake in one of the books, like the repository for source code for projects wasn't correct. So, and actually, the customer actually returned the book because of that. And I immediately corrected and kind of.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that story. Actually, that's something we don't talk about a lot here. We do talk about refunds sometimes, but so people who might not know, on LeanPub, we have a what we call our happiness guarantee, 100% happiness guarantee, which is that within 45 days of any purchase, you can just do a couple of clicks and you can do a refund. But for anyone who, I mean, for LeanPub authors listening who maybe have never asked for a refund themselves before, if you request a refund on LeanPub, you can just click a button, like you click a button, request a refund, and then click another button, and it's done. But we also have a little field where you can give feedback optionally if you want to, that the author can see. And they, by the way, they won't see who you are. They won't get any personal information about you when you do that. But we actually, if you haven't done it yourself, Dmitry, we actually have what we hope people take in good humor as a kind of passive aggressive little paragraph that says, we're sorry you don't like this book for whatever reason. It's perfectly fine. This is how much money the author's going to lose if you click the button below. And if you'd like to leave it, it's better said than that. But if you'd like to leave a message, you can do that. And actually, this is a way because that people have of actually communicating to an author what they didn't like about the book, and that can really help you not only with the content of your book or any mistakes or lack of clarity or things you could just do better, but also with the presentation of your book, right? So, for example, people might say, "Oh, I thought this was a book about subject X, but then I found out it was about subject Y," and then you can use that to change your about the book description on LeanPub, or you can even change your subtitle or even your title if your book hasn't been out for very long. And that kind of feedback, people often think, "Oh no, a refund, I'm losing X amount of money," or someone that really doesn't like me. And it's often just they're like, no, it's not that they dislike you or they think it was a terrible book or something like that. And that kind of feedback can actually be really helpful. I don't want to let you go without giving you an opportunity to talk about your visual category theory books, which are really fun and involve Lego. So I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about that series. And you've got one for chemistry as well, I believe.
Oh yes, that was a great addition to. I would say it's all started. I mean, because I have kids and they play with Lego. All started. Sometimes, I was playing with them and then I realized, okay, this combination of Lego blocks is something that can be represented from computer memory or some data structure or something. And sometimes I even used, I would say, thin Lego blocks. So put it on a panel and then represent traces and logs in such a way, right? But at one point I was thinking, actually, I wanted to do something with my son about chemistry, some project for school. And then I was thinking actually what actually to do. And then I was reading some book about artificial chemistry. This is chemistry that could be symbolic with some, I would say, atoms could be completely fictional, like a universe could have 1,000 atoms, so only 3 atoms. So everything could be, and chemical reactions could be completely made up. So that's great. Wow. I would say domain called artificial chemistry. It's used also kind of in unconventional computing, studying life and so many things, And the idea came to me actually to use Lego to represent chemical structures, but not in a way like I would say in 3D that was done before, but on a base plate. So, and this naturally represents, I would say, what we see chemical formulas, chemical structures on paper. So it actually very easy to reason. You have electrons, you can put small blocks, it's put reactions, so very powerful. And from that, actually, I came later to the idea to try mathematics as well, category theory, because I wanted to write something about category theory sometime before that, and even started, because category theory I learned by accident back in 2003, wasn't even connected to functional programming as it is now known, I would say computer science. So it was just pure interest, and it was always associated with physics, mathematics, biology, something like that, category theory. I never thought about it in context of programming. I knew it was computer science, but computer science of the past, not current functional programming languages, for example, Haskell or Scala and other languages. And I wanted to write a book, so I started, but then I have actually a very long list, probably 200 books to write, probably they would never be written. So, that was one of them. So I probably wrote 2 pages, and it was visual. So I was using PowerPoint. I use Microsoft PowerPoint as well a lot, and Visio, Microsoft Visio for diagrams. So I did some diagrams and then I put it aside and then when I got this idea to use blocks, and after I actually was successful in depicting graphs using Lego, because I could use Lego for arrows between objects. So, and then I got this idea, okay, so we can depict category theory arrows using Lego as well. And then I started all this series. I actually was thinking maybe 1 or 2 parts would be enough. And then I was able to do 7 and now have 8. And then I got another idea. Actually, some people complained that they don't like this Lego language for category theory. So they like more traditional diagrams. So I started another series called coparts, because in category theory, you have duality. So you have objects, arrows between them, and then you have dual objects, dual categories, the same objects, but arrows are completely reversed. So these coparts, the dual two parts, they have the same diagrams, but they are now traditional black and white, plus they are also color diagrams, but they resemble Lego ones, but they are normal kind of diagrams. So, and I probably did 2 coparts. It's time consuming, actually, all this, to do it properly and without mistakes, because like to write each part of visual category theory, I have to consult probably 10, 15 books on category theory, because it's very difficult, to do it right without mistakes. Some authors in category theory, there are slight differences in explanations. So I want to make it all coherent, so people won't complain. So far, no one said anything, like no one found mistakes. I found one typo, but no mistakes. So either people love it or they are completely so, but no one actually pointed me to particular mistake in my visual category theory books. Okay, this is wrong, So
well, I'm sure people do. I'm sure people do love it, and for anyone who's been listening, there will be links to all of these things in the transcript that you'll be able to find on the LeanPub website, and that's just so fascinating. And congratulations on a book with 1 typo. That's a very big achievement. The last question I always like to ask guests on the podcast, if they're LeanPub authors, is if there was any magical feature we could build for you, or any very annoying problem on LeanPub that we could fix for you. Is there anything specific you can think of that you would ask us to do?
Actually, yes, one feature is I have many courses, right? So I publish in PDF format. And right. In order to actually got a great idea, I can say it freely. I mean, anyone can implement. I don't want to patent it. So basically, you have a course in PDF, but in order to save time, you can publish a short course on LeanPub, for example, with questions and answers. I actually recently started writing quizzes for one of my books, and I love this. So in the future, I will add more quizzes to my courses and books. But currently, I have great courses, and I only want to publish mostly quizzes. Like questions, answers.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And at the end, I want to provide a certificate, but I want greater customization for certificate. So, for example, I tried with the course, but I wasn't able to make it very customizable. For example, I want to put my own image, right? And so is it possible? I don't think, what do you think?
Okay, so you're talking very specific, just so I get it clear. So we in addition, for anyone listening, in addition to being able to use LeanPub to publish ebooks, you can also use it to publish courses.
Yes,
where
exactly.
you can, and when you're creating a course, you can set up a certificate for someone to get when they complete the course. And so what you're asking for is more customization around the certificates.
So, for example, I could put, my, say, Software Diagnostics Institute, my name, right, and put my signature and say I have a very nice background, for example.
Okay.
So that would be more customizable.
Okay.
Right. So, and the course would be mostly questions and answers using existing course. because I don't
Okay.
have time to convert all my courses into a markdown format.
Right.
I will use kind of existing course, but in order to get a certificate, you have to purchase this thing.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Course, and then you do some questions and answers, like maybe 50 of them. It won't be easy, right? So, but at the end, you get certificate.
And so how do they get in this process, how would a person get graded to prove, or do they get graded by someone else or some machine at all?
Okay, so either he already knows this stuff, so then he would answer correctly.
He what, sorry?
Either he already knows the stuff, like the subject, right?
Right.
So he answers correctly, he gets graded, right? Or he purchases, or she purchases the course. The person purchases the course separately, studies, and then does this, I would say, course. Or you may even name it something differently, like
right.
Whatever is good. Like it would be great, for example, for me. I'm not sure about other people, but for me it would be great because I have, I would say, 7 or 8 or even more courses.
Okay.
And I would actually, instead of converting them into markdown format, splitting into chapters, I could devise my questions and answers for each, say, lesson. And then just put like lesson 1, 10 questions, lesson 2, 10 questions, lesson or exercise 1. I do in exercises. Or I even have books like practical foundations for Linux or Windows, like debugging. They don't have exercises, but they have chapters. So I could say chapter 1, questions.
Okay.
2.
That's really fascinating. Thanks very much for that feedback. That's really interesting and gives me a lot to think about.
I try this anyway just to see how it works, maybe for one of the courses.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks very much for that. Like I said, I have a lot to think about there. But yeah, well, Dmitry, thank you very much for a really great conversation and for taking the time out of a beautiful Dublin evening to talk to everyone about your career and about your work and about your books and everything. It's really fascinating, and we could have talked a lot longer about a lot more things. But maybe we'll do another one in the future. Thanks very much for being a LeanPub author as well.
Thank you, Len. That was really great.
Thanks.
Great journey, great interview. Thank you very much.
And as always, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Front Matter podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate and review it wherever you found it. And if you'd like to be a LeanPub author yourself, please check out our website at leanpub.com. Thanks.